Sixths are just one way of harmonizing notes across our instrument. Let's jump right in and establish a starting point. Here I'm in the open E major position. If we isolate the notes on the 3rd and 5th strings, we can use this string pairing as our first 6th voicing. Why is it called a 6th? One way to understand it is if we play the E major scale from the tone on the 5th string to the tone on the 3rd string. They are separated by 6 tones. So the 2 tones form what is known as a 6th interval, because they represent the distance between 6 scale degrees. However, as we'll soon learn, we don't need to know scales to make effective use of these voicings. Simply think of this 3rd to 5th string formation as something we can take up and down the neck. As we're starting in the open E major position, I'm going to leave the low E string open as a drone bass note. Now, we might want to strum this interval for more rhythmic attack. To get a clean voicing of this interval, you'll need to mute the strings around it as best you can. To mute the 2nd string, collapse back your index finger so it touches the 2nd string. To mute the 4th string sandwiched in between, collapse back your middle finger so it touches the 4th string. To mute the 6th string, there are 2 options. You could wrap your thumb around the neck so it touches and mutes the string, or you could mute it with the tip of your 2nd finger, still ensuring that same finger is collapsed back to mute the 4th string. This will take some time and practice, but it will allow you to strum the interval cleanly wherever you are on the neck. We'll be using similar muting techniques on the other strings. Now, each string pairing we're going to look at has 2 forms. We've already established our first form on the 3rd and 5th strings. Here's the other. We can also take this form across the neck, although like with the first form, you'll find it sounds better at some frets than others, depending on the chord or bass you're playing over. Here, I'm going to play over an E bass note again, but we'll look at applying these forms to other notes and chords later. The same process applies for muting adjacent strings. In this form, our ring and index finger are collapsed back, and the low E is muted either by our thumb or ring finger tip. Now we have our 2 forms for this string pairing, we can try combining them in a sequence. This is where knowledge of scales can help, but it's not necessary. For example, we could sequence the 2 forms based on the E major scale. Each position represents a degree of the scale played in sixths. Or we could improvise something that doesn't conform to one specific scale. You can also use these forms to practice a simple string skipping technique. Simply use alternate picking. Pick down on the 5th string and then up on the 3rd string, so you're picking in the direction of travel, making sure not to hit the string in between. Now let's move to our next string pairing on the 2nd and 4th strings, where we can build 2 additional 6th forms. Since we're in E major for this example, we could visualize a starting point around an A form chord at the 7th fret. So that's our first form for this string pairing. Again, practice collapsing back fingers to touch and mute adjacent strings. Onto our second formation on these strings. Again, for E major, I could visualize a starting point around this C-shape chord form. Like before, let's try combining the 2 forms across this string pairing and see what we come up with. We now have 2 string pairings, giving us a number of positions to harmonize in sixths. For example, here I'm playing the same movement around E major in different positions. Onto our final string pairing on the 1st and 3rd strings. Since we're in E major for this example, we can again use that as a starting point. Here I'm visualizing the first form around a D shape on the 2nd fret. You could also see this as built around a C shape. So if you've learned the neck using the caged method, extracting 6th forms from these positions is another way of using it. And the second form on this string pairing. We can use the top part of the E shape for this one. In E major, we'd play this in the open position. Again, let's try combining the forms in a harmonized sequence. What we now have are 3 string pairings, each with 2 forms we can use to play across the neck in sixths. Now we can apply these forms to any chord we want to play around. For example, in A major, I might visualize reference points based on shapes for that chord. D major. And these 6th forms we've learned also work for targeting minor chords. Take B minor as an example. So all we're doing is extracting the sixth forms we've learned from relative chord shapes, which you may have already learned through the caged method, to get our bearings on the neck. This doesn't mean we literally have to begin our movements on those chord positions, but having those reference points will give you a centre around which to build your harmonized movements. At first, you'll want to practice these movements over single chords, and on the lesson page there are backing tracks to help with this. But as you become confident with playing over single chords, you can try playing them through chord changes. For more help with this concept, visit the lesson page linked in the description. Cheers.